and it's within the GOP, the Republican Party, so a real divide. It's also looming as a key issue through to 2024 and the presidential race. So in Kyiv, is there a real nervousness about the future of US support?
There is, and you would have seen in the last few days that President Zelensky started to announce that they were going to invest significant amounts of money in localization and production of military capability. It's because they can see that over the horizon, support is going to get harder and harder, that the level of support they had, obviously, when the situation was acute and the Russians were laying siege to Kyiv, is not necessarily the same circumstances as it is today, where there's a grinding fight in the eastern part of the country, although still very significant and still claiming a very large amount of lives. That changes the amount of support that they can expect from foreign countries, and they're preparing for a possibility of having to live on leaner times. However, it's going to be absolutely vital if Ukraine has a chance to win the war for US support to continue. One of the reasons why we've seen the Ukrainian counteroffensive struggle is because people underestimated just how long and how hard it would be to retrain their military on Western equipment. Now that's happened. They've had to train hundreds of thousands of more soldiers to get them up to the standard where they can fight in a pretty horrible battle situation. And so to get them to that point has obviously meant that this year counteroffensive had very high hopes and has achieved a lot in terms of degrading Russian forces, but hasn't achieved the sort of breakthrough that they would have liked. And now flying into a presidential election, it's going to get a little bit harder for them. But overall, I don't necessarily think it's a hugely popular issue for Republicans. Still, when I look at the polls, even amongst the Republican base, and the best polling in the world is done by the Ukrainian government. They know what their allies are thinking all the time. They regularly track polling information because Zelensky has a background in media. He's very good at this. He knows that the vast majority of American support doing more for Ukraine. He knows the vast majority of GOP voters, Republican voters, support Ukraine. And so it's not necessarily a winning issue, even if it's a very disruptive issue for certain members of the Republican Party to jump up and down about.
Will it rattle European allies now that they potentially will have to step up to the plate in an even greater way?
Yes, I think that's certainly the case. We've seen that Germany has been willing to do a lot more this year. However, the relationship with Poland and Ukraine has hit some hard times as well. Poland has been a stalwart supporter of the Ukrainian government and sent huge amounts of military equipment and aid. However, a fight diplomatically over grain shipments has caused that relationship to degrade. So we're seeing kind of the long-term fatigue of an alliance-based war where the Ukrainians are dependent on foreign aid, but they do all the fighting. And so there's this constant tension between needing to continue to support a country that's doing almost all the fighting itself against a country which is much larger than itself. But they're doing very well. I think if you went back to everyone's expectations in February last year when the Russians stormed the border and said that they would have thrown them out of Kyiv, thrown them out of Kharkiv, retaken Kherson and had them on the ropes in the south. You would have said that this was a very, very successful scenario for the Ukrainian people and a very good deal for American aid to put an aggressive country like Russia that has invaded many of its neighbors regularly over the past 15 years on the ropes and in a position where it won't be able to do this again.
On another matter, you wrote in the Financial Review yesterday in support of Mike Posulo. You've had a bit to do with him. It's interesting and probably one of few voices we've heard in support of Mike Posulo off the back of those reports in the Nine papers last week. You've said that the public service in Australia would be worse off if he is forced to retire, much worse off in general if we don't build more public servants like him. Why did you feel compelled to come out in support of the embattled Secretary of Home Affairs?
Oh, because I think that if you follow a man around long enough, you'll find a reason to fire him. If you go through every human being on the planet's text messages, you'll probably find something that you don't like if it's publicly exposed. And I think there's some significant questions about how those text messages of his got into the public domain. And certainly there's a scandal there in terms of the degree of familiarity with certain power brokers. But all that being said, I think one of the things that makes Mike Posulo such a target for his opposition is the fact that he's been the go-to guy for multiple governments, going back basically the entire generation of my time in professional government and in national security. He's been one of the leading figures. He's been the guy that multiple governments have gone to regularly to solve problems that the public sector can't solve without a bit of grit and without a bit of aggression. Now, that aggression has marked him out as a bit of a tall poppy. He enjoys an embattled Senate estimates hearing. He can be bullish. He's willing to give his opinion on matters of geopolitics. And I think that that serves as a particularly positive model for young people coming up in the public sector, that if they can contrast it with the sort of grey people that create the circumstances that governments have regularly pulled Posulo in to fix, we'd get fewer of those circumstances emerging if we had more public servants that were willing to give free and open and fierce advice to government. So I think there's a degree to which his effectiveness has marked him out as a bit of a tall poppy. He's been highly effective in implementing border control policies that, while very controversial, are supported by both sides of government. And attacking him personally, I think, has become a bit of a proxy for attacking that policy, because he's an easier target than trying to relitigate Australia's border policy. So I think he's a bit unfairly targeted. He's certainly enjoyed his degree of brawling throughout his career. But I think if we should encourage a bolder, more assertive and more willing to speak openly public sector going forward. And I think the model of taking personal responsibility for government outcomes is something that we want to encourage and not just beat up when these people emerge that are slightly different to what we expect to be the norm in government.
Internet 2.0 founder Rob Potter joining me live from Vienna. Thanks so much.